I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 361 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Lonely at the top? So I'm going to venture a guess that if you pressed play on today's episode, that this is a sentiment that resonates with you, that in some way, shape, or form, you have experienced this feeling of loneliness that is so connected to and inherent to the stage of life where you've risen to a position of leadership that maybe has thinned the air a bit, right? Thinned the crowd a bit in terms of having a peer group around you. And I want to give you a little bit of context about why I picked this topic for today's episode. And to do that, we have to go back a little bit and have a little history lesson. So when I first graduated from college, I thought I was going to start my professional life in New York City. So I went to school, I went to Cornell, which is in upstate New York, and much of the student body ended up starting their careers in New York City. I mean, one, it's a giant city. Two, it is the closest metropolitan area to that university. And so it just makes a lot of sense for people, whether they were finishing degrees in law or medicine or business or engineering. There was just so much opportunity in New York. And I was really excited that when I finished my internship at P&G, I was offered a full-time job. And I was really excited that it was going to be in New York. So that happened right before my senior year. And I kind of went into my senior year knowing that I had that offer. And at some point along the way, the particular role that I had been hired to fill was eliminated, right? Some kind of, reorganization or shuffle happened, and they no longer had this job in New York, that particular job. And so I got this call because God bless them, right? They were like, don't panic. We still have a role for you. And you could go to Dallas or Tampa or Atlanta, 3 cities in which I knew 0 people, right? So my whole vision of moving to New York with my friends and starting our careers together kind of evaporated in that moment. And I started to try to wrap my head around, like, how bad did I want to work for P&G, right? Would it be better to just get a different job in New York, or should I really consider one of these other cities? And after a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of thought, I picked Atlanta as the city that I would move to. So when I tell you that I knew no one when I moved there, I mean literally 0 people. My mom had a cousin who was her age that lived in suburb of Atlanta, who I had met a couple of times, like a handful of times in my life. And my mom also had a friend who had a daughter who was my age, but I had never met her. Okay. She turned out to be lovely. We did eventually meet, but I had nothing like pulling me into a social structure in the city of Atlanta. So I moved there kind of sight unseen. And worse yet, I was working out of my apartment. So remember, this is not, modern times when everybody is working out of their home offices and that's normal. This was 1995, in which we had dial-up internet. Right? Like no one was working from home. It was so rare. I didn't know a single friend who had a job where they worked from home. They all went to offices. And so I moved to the city where I knew no one, and I worked out of an apartment, and I had no roommate. So the recipe for me to be lonely was set, right? It was pretty clear how this was going to go down, except P&G did this beautiful thing, which was to establish women's networks. And so in the Southeast region where I was living and working, they had the Southeast Women's Network. They even had a little acronym, SEWN. So we had all these, swag that had SEWN written on them. And the Southeast Women's Network included women from the Florida locations, from like Charlotte, North Carolina, and the surrounding area, Atlanta for sure. And then I think it went as far west as like Birmingham, Alabama. So we had these, and maybe Tennessee may have been included in that same region. So we would periodically get together for gatherings. Like they would host conferences and meetings at a variety of hotels in the region. And also in the immediate Atlanta area where I was living, there was a sales office. Now, we didn't work out of it, but we could use it. It had like the big photocopier, right? If you needed to make copies for your customers. And virtually everyone who was connected to that office was in some kind of a sales or an HR role. So I had this small crew of women who I got to know through the Southeast Women's Network. And we would then kind of take off on our own and get together for, we would go to like get Mexican food and margaritas on Friday night, or we would have brunch on Saturday or something. So it created a little bit of community for me in a city where I would not have had it otherwise. Then when I moved to Cincinnati, so from Atlanta, I moved to Cincinnati with P&G and I moved to their corporate headquarters. And massive community. I mean, the peer group as young leaders in a company of that size is enormous. And again, there is a pretty formalized structure around creating social events and training events that people can go to. So I had a strong peer group within the sales function. And then when I moved to marketing, I had a really strong peer group of fellow marketers, right? Men and women. But the further and further up that you go inside of a big company, the fewer people there are who are living a similar life, right? The fewer people at that level, traditional pyramid gets narrower. And the fewer people who are living a life that's similar to yours in other attributes, right? So I may have looked around at some point and seen a few other women. And in P&G's case, like enough of them, right? It was a good, healthy mix of men and women, but not as many who were starting families or who were married, or, you start to kind of add those other attributes and the group gets smaller. And then as you look up the ladder to higher and higher levels, the peer group gets smaller and smaller. Okay. Then I left my corporate nest and I started my own company. And I went to one person, right? Me, myself, and I, solo entrepreneur for the early years of running a company. And let me tell you, talk about lonely. So I went off looking for how could I recreate community with other people who were starting companies. And I found a couple of local groups in Cincinnati where I was living, and I was able to like cobble together a little bit of community. Within my own company, as I started to build a team, I still love having people to talk to, right? To what I refer to as thought partnership, people that I can, dance with an idea and kind of collaborate on a project. Love it so much. But as an entrepreneur, as the owner of the company, everyone is ultimately looking to me for answers. Right? There's no one above me that I can look to and say, what should I do here? And there's no one really next to me who's a true peer. And I really missed having a peer group, right? I missed having mentors. Honestly, some days I missed having a boss. The voice of experience and wisdom and somebody validating like, yeah, that feels like the right thing to do. Go ahead and do that. Who had been there before. I really missed that. And my poor husband, who I tried to put into that role 1,000 times, right? I tried to come downstairs or, meet him in the kitchen and be like, what should I do about this? And he made it very clear that this was not his wheelhouse. And that was not going to be where I found, community. So I really went and looked for community in other places. Over the years, I have been a part of a number of different groups, training groups where I would put myself under the direction of somebody who was an expert in something I needed to learn more about. And often that would bring with it a community of peers. And to this day, I do that. I'm in a group now where I have a community of peers and I have strategists who I can work with on my business because they have more experience, right? They have a broader base of experience that they can draw from to give perspective and give guidance. And so that ability to be connected to other people who are kind of playing the same game has been really important for me in my life. And I know that my peers who stayed in corporate jobs, like when I left 15 years ago to start my life as an entrepreneur, my peers who stayed in corporate jobs and continued to climb the ranks are really in pretty rarefied air by now. By this point in their career, they have way fewer peers and certainly then fewer female peers. And the conversations I'm having with them is like, they're just not quite sure what to do about it, right? It's not a dynamic that's great. We all know it's not great to feel isolated or lonely. And yet here we are, right? If you are a person as a woman who is running a company of substance and you're running a team and you go out in your community, it is less likely that you're going to find people who really get your life, who really understand what you're doing day in and day out. And so too, if you are a very senior leader in an organization, right? It's just the facts. I want to talk to all my fellow business owners and introduce you to my friends at Mackie. They are experts in providing CFO services that give you the clarity and confidence that you need, not only to succeed, but to make those strategic decisions that transform your business. Listen, running a business can be stressful, and trust me, I get it. You always want more time away from work to do the things you love, but you also want more profit. And that's where Mackie comes in, with their full-service financial, accounting, and executive guidance. With their Prosper for Business system, you'll have a trusted partner by your side, combining strategic planning, data analysis, and goal setting to help you grow further, better, and faster. And their results speak for themselves. Mackie's clients experience an average first-year profit increase of over 100%, and business owners report a 20% increase in time freedom. So start your journey to prosper today. Visit mackieadvisors.com/brilliant balance and book your consultation. Okay, balance builders, any chance you're feeling a little overwhelmed by your overloaded schedule? I know, I've been there. In fact, it's why I created 14 Days to Calendar Control. This is my step-by-step program where I share my personal system and set of tools to help you transform your chaotic weeks into easy breezy ones. Okay, maybe not easy breezy, but at least edited and organized. Listen, there's training, templates, and tools in there to help you get things under control quickly. Say goodbye to constant conflicts and chronic rushing, and say hello to calendar control. Curious? Head to brilliant-balance.com/calendar for instant access. That's brilliant-balance.com/calendar. Now back to the show. So I want to look at why that's true in this episode and start to unpack like what could we do about it. But I think it's important that we look at what makes this dynamic unique. So the first thing that I jotted down is you do literally have fewer peers to relate to, right? As a numbers game, there are just fewer people who are going to be at level with you as you get higher and higher in an organization. And again, whether you are the owner or whether you are inside of a corporate structure or whether you are in a professional, like whether you're, let's say, a physician who runs their own practice, right? Or you're a very senior physician inside of a hospital system, same dynamic, just fewer people who truly understand the unique challenges and pressures that come from having to make all the decisions and having to bear the weight of that position of leadership. Which is kind of brings me to my second point, which is I think it gets lonelier because at these levels, you face extremely high expectations, right? The decisions are not small anymore. They're big, and they don't just affect you, they affect other people, right? When you're making staffing decisions and organization design decisions and budget decisions, the pressure to get those right is higher because more people will be affected by the outcome. And the pressure to always have the answer can make it really hard for you to show up honestly or vulnerably, and ask for help because there's this belief like I am supposed to have all the answers. And so that willingness to show vulnerability, which we think always could be perceived as weakness, is just harder to do when we're at a level that we know people are counting on us to have those answers. So because of that, I think it is far more likely that we turn to like a self-imposed isolation, right? What happens is we can retract into being hyper independent, right? So like stubbornly self-sufficient. that it can make it difficult to trust enough to delegate, right? Or to give ourselves permission to let other people in. And that just reinforces that cycle of isolation. So it kind of turns on itself, right? It starts off with like almost a noble reason of, I'll just handle it. I'll handle it on behalf of my organization. But that can turn into like, we're like Elsa locked in the tower, right? It's self-imposed isolation where we're trying to do everything ourselves because we're trying to protect other people. That's not great. That does not lead us to a place where we feel the warmth of connection and where we feel supported and where we feel like we have enough space to kind of work things out. And I think that's compounded by a really strong fear of judgment. We are living in a culture where there's not a lot of room to get it wrong. There's not a lot of room to share that we don't have an answer or that our thinking on something is evolving in real time. It can make us we worry that it can make us look weak or that people will judge it that way. And I think there's almost like a discouragement from being open. Like we are discouraged from being fully open. So there's a lot of trying to get it all right in our head or get it all right, like sitting in a room by ourselves and then to sort of emerge with the answer, right? We sort of emerge to the balcony and it's like, here's the answer. But that's not really how it works. The reality is there's a lot of percolating on these ideas, a lot of needing to gather input from people before you have an answer. And so if we're so worried that sharing the fact that we don't have the answer or that we're struggling to figure something out, if we're so worried about that we don't do it, then we, one, reinforce isolation, right? And two, we don't really get to the best outcome. So this strong fear of judgment can just keep us in that cycle. And then I think the last piece, which sort of ladders into feeling lonely, is you can feel like you don't have time to make those connections. I know I definitely felt this way. For a long chapter in my adult life, I was like, I have time for two big things, work and my family. And maybe you could add, and taking care of myself, like as an individual human, right? Trying to stay healthy and whole. But that time for deep, meaningful connection with people outside of a very tight circle, to really invest in relationships with girlfriends who got it, to really invest in relationships with even like extended family, it just didn't feel like there was time because the demands of the other pieces were so significant. And as somebody who is now, I have one kid off in college and two in high school, that's opening up a little bit. There's a little bit more room now in this chapter for that connection. I'm so grateful for it. But I think that I really hurt myself by not making more time for the connection, by viewing that as like, it was okay for it to be secondary. Right. And I'm seeing the women who invested deeply in those relationships for years and years, really how those are bearing fruit in this chapter of their life, right? They're not playing catch up. So I think the fact that it's harder potentially to have these connections when we are in positions of leadership maybe makes it even more important to address, right? If it were easy, we'd already be doing it. And so while I can justify it and give you these reasons of, there are fewer people and you're under really high expectations, which creates a lot of pressure. And it makes sense that you would turn inward and try to handle everything yourself and that you would have a fear of judgment and that you would tell yourself you don't have time. All of that makes perfect sense. But maybe that's all the more reason to figure out, where are you going to find your people? What is it going to take for you to find people who really do understand the dynamics of your life and who can be that supportive structure, both socially and emotionally, that you deserve? And again, when I think all the way back to my early days as a brand new hire in a giant company, that was my lifeline. The fact that there were these women around me, I'm still in touch with many of them, who we were in the same boat at the same time. And we were trying to figure out how to be young women who were very, very junior in a very giant traditional organization. And a lot of us were calling on buyers at our customers who were much older men who had very clear points of view about just how little we knew, and there was so much support and strength that came from them understanding the experience. We were all trying to create social lives. We were trying to find partners. We were trying to make time for that. Like there was so much similarity about the rest of our lives that it created a bond. And it was so powerful. And I think it never stops being powerful. It just gets harder to find. So my encouragement to you in this episode is, yes, acknowledge the reality of what makes it difficult to find people who really get you and understand you when you're at this level, but don't let it be an excuse, right? Let it be true. Let it be a justification for how you may have ended up in this place where you're looking around going, I don't have this. I don't have it. There are not people who I can just really tell the truth to and know that they're going to get it. Go find those people, right? The community that we are building in Bold is 100% designed for women who are sitting at the top of their organization and who are craving that connection. So my community is one place where you can do this. But if it's not my community, go find a place where you can plug into people who get you. Because that human need to feel seen and heard and understood doesn't stop applying to you when you reach a certain level of success. In fact, it arguably gets even more important. And I want you to go find that for yourself. So that is all for today, my friends. Until next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.